So to get started, the first thing you want to do is go into your terminal and npm install React Router DOM. That will take a minute or two. After your installation completes, you'll want to go to the entry point of your application. For most projects, this is usually the index.js that looks kind of something like this. You'll want to go in there and import browser router from React Router DOM. We'll then take that browser router and we'll wrap our root app component with that. Moving into the root app component, you'll notice that I have an initial basic structure here. I have a nav and a div for content. That's it. We also have some basic CSS here that you can copy if you want to follow this tutorial. Now, the first thing you have to understand with React Router is how do you perform navigations? How do you trigger the URL to change? To do that, we're first going to import the link component from React Router DOM. To use that link component, we're going to write it like this. So basically, you provide it a toProp, which is the path where you want it to go when clicked, and then you just provided some text. So if I make a second example here, perhaps maybe we want an about page. We'll take that and we give it a path of /about. With those two example links typed out, you'll notice that in our example on the right here, when I click on about, notice that the URL is changing to /about. And similarly, as I click back and forth, it's dynamically changing that URL. Now that we've learned how to update the URL using links from React Router, you might be wondering, how about scenarios where you want to change the URL or maybe you want to redirect the user programmatically? Now you can achieve that using the use history hook. Put it up in the top of your component like this. To demonstrate how this history object works, perhaps let's think about a use case where we have a button, and when you click that button, something happens and then it navigates the user. So as an example, maybe we have a subscribe button, which probably has a logic something like this. What we want to do is probably some kind of logic, maybe call some APIs, and then you can use the history to push the URL to something else. So for maybe after subscription, they go to your channel. Right, so if we provide this as a event handler to our onClick here, now what happens when we click the button? It's going to do some logic and then it's going to history.push, and you'll see that that's another way to change the URL programmatically. So the core thing to understand here is that for the most part, you'll want to use links probably for things like the navigation bar, or if you have some kind of sidebar. But for most other things where you want to programmatically navigate the user to a different page, you'll want to use history. Going back to our simplified example here, the next lesson to learn is how to define routes. Right, we have our links over here, but nothing is really changing other than the URL. What we really want there is for this content to change depending on what that URL is. To get started, we're going to import the route component from React Router DOM. Then you can use it like so. I'll make another one for the about page. Now that we have some basic routes defined, to understand what's happening here, you can kind of think of routes as URL matchers. So for example, we have a path prop passed in here. This is saying if the URL has a /about in it, I want to render whatever is in here. So you'll notice that if I have /about, in the URL, it's going to render about page. Now you're probably wondering, why is the home page showing here? We're on /about, we only want to see the about page. And that's because technically both of these paths are matching the URL, right? The URL has both a slash and also a /about. To fix that, we can add exact here, and it's only going to match exactly this path. It doesn't match anything after it. So in that case, now if we're navigating between our home and about links here, you'll notice that now we're only seeing either the home page or the about page in the correct URLs that it's supposed to be in. Now, anytime you're in a situation where you only want one route to render at a time, you really want to use the switch component. So we'll import that from React Router DOM, and we're going to wrap our routes with the switch. The way the switch works is it looks through all of the children routes, and it only renders the very first route that matches the URL properly. It very much works similar to the switch statement in regular JavaScript, where you can provide different cases. And then where this gets really useful is just like in a regular switch statement, right? You can provide a default case. So perhaps we also have a default route, a catch-all route that we want to present if the user goes to a URL that does not match any of the routes that I defined. I want to tell them, hey, you went to a wrong page, or 404 not found. All right, so for example, maybe if I do /test in the URL here, it's going to take me to a 404 not found. You'll notice that you wouldn't have been able to pull off this catch all without the switch statement, because as an example, if I were to remove it, what happens is you're kind of back to that same problem that we had before, where you have two routes rendering at the same time, because now in our example over here, it's seeing that it does match /about, but it also matches our catch whatever route. So it's rendering both of them. So basically the thing to remember is anytime you're in a situation where you only want to render one route at a time, make sure to wrap your routes with a switch component. If you want to learn a little bit more, I highly recommend going to the reactrouter.com website, which is the official documentation. There's a web section here that if you click into it, there's a ton of great documentation. And the stuff we covered is pretty much the basic stuff and a little bit of the no matching here. I would highly recommend looking into nesting as well as URL parameters. And honestly, if you learn those two other things, that pretty much covers you for, I would say, 90% of the things you would have to use React Router for. Now, I do plan on probably making follow-up videos to cover those two topics, and probably a couple other things in here. If that's something that you're interested in, definitely let me know in the comments. Perhaps subscribe if you found some value in this video, and make sure to like the video. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.